There was always a sense that I was different.
And she kind of just reassured me with real life examples that that's not how it was.
It's taken a while to unpack it all because it's a weird thing that have to come out.
I wasn't 100% sure I was lesbian.
And one of my kids fell out in the bikini set. Families are a great thing, but I have one now with my husband being gay because it was on TV when I was growing up.
Shouting 2468 gay is just as good as straight.
Precious queer youth are taken care of.
I've been mistaken for a man ever since age 20.
And yet back then also you had that freedom to express yourself in these places.
Wait, so like all of these people are LGBTQ?
You're listening to LGBTI Conversations with Anthony Doig. On today's show, our next guest has lived 9.5 decades, saw the queer side in the US Army in World War II, hit the big time in his fashion career, fell in love and had a 40-year relationship in a time that being queer was definitely not the norm. Welcome to LGBTI Conversations, Stan Herman.
Thank you.
Now, you've had a pretty amazing life, 95 years young. That's to be celebrated in itself, really.
It is, isn't it?
And you don't look a day over 50.
Well, maybe 65, maybe 70. I don't know. I look good. I look good for my age. There's no doubt about it.
Through camera, I can totally agree with you there. Now, just a bit about, you were born in Brooklyn.
I was born in Brooklyn at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital.
And what year was that?
1928, 11:45 in the evening.
So paint a bit of a picture. Obviously, when you were a baby, you didn't know really what was going on in New York in that time. As a child, paint us a bit of a picture of what it was like back then.
Well, I was actually born in Brooklyn, but my parents moved. Within 2 years, I was moved to New Jersey, which was 12 miles away from the big town, but it was a world away at the same time. A little town called Passaic, New Jersey, where you could stay there and never move beyond it and felt that you had a world of your own. We had our restaurants, we had our movie theaters, we had very nice neighbors, we had pretty parks, and a very secluded life, just 12 miles in the shadow of the big city. That's how I grew up.
Wow, and you'd say that your childhood was pretty average for that period of time?
I think it was average, yes. So it's marvelous now to look back at yourself and see what you were like. I wanted to be a part of everything. I was very social in the sense that I had good friends. I was surrounded by lots of people. The blow that happened early in my life was that my mother died when I was 12. So that was a blow that has stayed with me my whole life. My father remarried within a year. I had a stepmother who was not the brightest, but that was the big blow, my early years. And I seem to have gotten over it quickly because my father moved me in with his sister and their family, and I fell in love with them. And my brother and I were very happy campers right after my mother died. So normal existence happened quicker than I thought it would. But that was the big blow.
It's interesting, as a child, it seems like they're able to adapt to situations a lot more than adults. Would you agree in that?
Very true. And again, in looking back, having written the book, I realized how quickly you cover the wounds and you move on. And if you don't cover them properly, they can stay with you for a long time. But that was the first thing. And the second thing was I was very close to a group of guys. We all stuck together. There were 4 of us. We were like the 4 morons. And 2 of them also died very young in a car accident, having come to visit me in school. So those were the 2 big death signs in my early life. But other than that, I enjoyed myself early on.
Going through adolescence, you probably came to the point where you realized that something wasn't quite right. You weren't attracted to females. You were more attracted to males. Can you tell us a bit about that period?
I realized in my head that I didn't know it was an attraction. I knew I preferred to be in the company of guys. I'm an interesting type because I was very good at sports, very much accepted in that realm. I was interested in clothing design. At the same time, I was the best guy on the baseball team, a good runner. If I had feminine qualities, I hadn't discovered them yet, but I did find that I was attracted to men. I sort of put it away. I thought it was going to be something that disappeared. I dated women. I always went to the petting stage and found it very difficult to continue But at that time, it was easy to make excuses for yourself because it was a terrible thing to actually go the whole way. So I had that excuse over my head that I didn't have to go the whole way until the right person came along. But I didn't worry over it. I just kept living a very good life. Did something quite interesting. I was always interested in clothing design because my father had a silk shop in New Jersey and one in Pennsylvania and New York. And I would sell patterns to women, Vogue patterns and advanced patterns. And I would love to work in my father's store and speak to the customers about their choice of fabric and their choice of color. And my father seemed to be enchanted by it. He didn't push me to be a lawyer or a doctor. And when I told him I wanted to go to a school that had at least a design course in it, he accepted it and never questioned that. So when I went off to school, it just seemed like a natural thing for me.
Yeah, it's quite interesting you saying that because on one hand, I suppose fashion more now than ever, I suppose in today's, it's kind of associated with the LGBTIQ plus community anyway.
Right.
But back then, was it so much the same or was it because I suppose a lot of people, a completely different time again, I suppose there wasn't there was very little representation out there for the community as a whole. So if you're coming to terms with your sexuality and also in this world of fashion, there's probably some crossover there, is there?
Yes, there is. These questions sort of, they pluck at my memory, and even having written the book, there are things that come out now that I had forgotten about. The second I moved to the city of New York after college, I eased myself very quickly into the homosexual world. But that, I'm jumping ahead. I accepted my sexuality in the Army.
Wow.
I was drafted into the Army, the Korean War. I had left college. Again, one of those guys who I was president of my fraternity, president of my class, accepted by everybody. Nobody ever accused me of being anything but normal in the sense normal. I even remember, believe it or not, I could kill myself for it, of our fraternity made a speech about we didn't want to have homosexuals in our fraternity. Would you believe that?
Wow. Well, it was a different time back then. I suppose it's that thing where you stay quiet to survive and move along. So you can't hold that against you.
It's pretty horrifying that I did. And in my deepest psyche, I knew that I was intrigued by that. I had very close male friends. I had very close female friends in college, one of which who really wanted to marry me, one of which I did have sex with. But I don't know, I kept drifting. And then, of course, I was almost relieved that I was drafted in the Army. I was just concerned about going to Korea because my whole battalion went to Korea. But somehow I worked it out that I was sent to Europe instead of Korea. And that truly changed my life. The trip to Europe, waking up in the German Alps, looking at those mountaintops and finding myself really, I think, one of the most important moments in my life. I fell in love with the Alps, which to this day, I go back and visit all the time. I was surrounded by all these guys. Again, no sex involved, but just the camaraderie of them all. And everybody loved me. And then one day, somebody came to the mail carrier and he looked at me and said, "Where have you been all my life?" I was freaked. And we became sisters, almost like sisters, no sex. But he said to me, "I'm going to take you all around Europe. You're going to really become one of us." And the two of us just had a ball. He took me everywhere, Venice, London, Paris. And boy, did I have sex.
So was there much homosexual activity within the Army that you could see during that time?
Yes. Very much so. Once I was let into the underground. Dick, for instance, he had every lieutenant in the concern. The only time we had any problem was when somebody was caught blowing somebody or screwing somebody. It was always a regular Army officer that was caught. None of the draftees. It was always one of those. And they were thrown out. They were thrown out of the Army at that point.
Because it was during that time too. It was like it didn't exist, and especially in the US and in most countries. What year were we talking there?
You're talking 1950, 1951, 52.
Yeah, so that was that whole period in the US too, where it was like, well, we don't exist in the community or in government departments or anywhere, and that get rid of the problem if we come across it and just pretend that it's all business as usual.
Right.
Even if you're defending your own country.
No, it's true.
Which is pretty sad when you think about it, isn't it? You're putting your life on the line and then they kick you out because find out you're a homosexual. It's pretty terrible.
It's true. But again, I eased into it so easily. It was like I was prepared for it all my life. And I was really quite naive sexually. I didn't have great fantasies. I just knew that I wanted to be in the company of guys. And then, of course, when I came back to New York to work in the fashion business, within a year, I met the man of my life, and that changed my life. We spent the next 40 years together.
I was going to talk to you about that. You had a partner for 40 years before, unfortunately, he passed away.
Right.
Tell us a bit about that, because during that time as well, that would have been a bit different. It wouldn't have been the norm, I should imagine.
No, we weren't the normal, but we were the center of everything. I mean, his family accepted our relationship immediately. His family to this day are my heirs. My family didn't accept it easily, but they accepted it. And somehow the cadence of our life was so easy and normal. He was a teacher, so he had to be a little concerned about being outed, but it didn't bother him if he was. I was a clothing designer. People expected me to be gay. But we had such, I hate to sound Pollyanna about it, but we had such a great relationship. In the beginning, it was tricky because I don't think I was ready for the relationship. I was too active sexually. And at the end of our first year together, he turned to me one day and said, I don't think you're ready for this. I want a real long relationship. I love you. You're going to be with me the rest of my life. And that shocked. I just did a day-by-day dance for a while. And then we split. And that year I went out and fucked all over the place and seemed to get it out of my system for the most part. Within a year, he came back. He was upstate New York. And we looked at each other and said, well, okay, this is it. And it was 40 years. My sexuality was always very tricky. I was con man when it came to sex. I loved outside sex, which he understood and led me through until I learned how to manipulate that in my life without hurting our relationship. We were married. The Advocate did a big story on us many years ago about the normalcy of our life in an abnormal world.
Yeah, and it's 40 years. And, in the gay world, I always say you can double it. So you may as well say 80, because I've been together for 20 years with my partner. And I say, it's like 40, because we've got so many other outside factors, even in this day and age, to come into a relationship. And men being men, obviously there's that whole sexual desire too, which needs to be reined in. Boys will be boys.
It was a problem for me. I mean, it never was for Gene. There were moments when we split, when I would tell him to go out and do something, but it didn't work. It just didn't work. And of course, we built a very solid life. I became successful as a designer. He was a wonderful teacher. And then he had his summers free. He started to write. He worked on his first novel for about 5 or 6 years. And when it was published, a big time seller, it was reviewed in the New York Times as best family novel since Thomas Mann. He stopped teaching and became a full-time writer. And I was his full-time partner. We had this beautiful house. We got a beautiful house in the Hamptons. We had kept our apartment in New York. I had a studio, and we lived this very almost pedestrian life. Amazing for me, because in the fashion business, everybody thinks it's so glamorous. I came home most every night to a man who really wanted me there.
Wow, that's lovely. Something for a lot of people, even this day and age, to look up to and crave that relationship. And you had it in your lifetime. So that's pretty special on its own.
Very much so. I would say Gene Horowitz was the most important single person in my life and will be to the moment I go. And I talk to him every day. I talk to him a lot. He's so much a part of everything in my life. I mean, I'm far from an intellectual, but he introduced me to his intellectual friends. He introduced me to music. He introduced me to opera. He introduced me to reading and writing. What else can you ask for?
And I think that's a secret of a good relationship, is the other person opening their world to you and you learning from them, and vice versa as well.
Right. He also died very quickly in one day, had a heart attack, and it was over. And the moment in time that he died was also a very important part of my life. Gene wanted very much for me to retire. I was already in my early 60s. My career was not going anywhere big, but it was a solid career. I had good business. It was mostly, I was biting off the edges of fashion, no longer in the hot center. I had a 10-year moment in the hot center of fashion where I was the it guy. I was one of the 5 designers on 7th Avenue for a brief span. And then I wasn't. And he wanted to actually move to Europe. He wanted to move to Italy. and keep the house out here. The year he died, I was sort of plucked out of nowhere and became president of the Council of Fashion Designers of America, which was probably the most prestigious position you can get in the fashion business. It was a fluke, and the CFDA became my lover. I stayed president for 16 years, which is quite unusual. I was able to sort of ease myself out of this horror, which was the end of a great love affair, and plug myself back into power in New York, which is what the fashion business is all about. If you're powerful, it's great. And to this day, I've never stopped working. And I still bite off the edges, but the edges are very rich.
That is the part of staying young and actually living to a great age too, is staying active. I think that's the key that Western world is slowly waking up to, that retirement is not good in a lot of ways. You need to have that work ethic till the day you depart.
Listen, my father lived to be 105. He worked until he was 98. He rode horses in Madison Square Garden until he was 80 years old. I am his clone. There's no doubt about it. And at the end of his life, when we've spent much time together, I'd tell him, we are alike. We act alike. I'm a faggot. What about you? I would do that to him all the time.
I'm sure he would have liked that.
He was a very elegant guy. The day he died, I happened to be with him. It was extraordinary. He was dressed in his Ralph Lauren pajamas and his Gucci slippers and slipped away into the other world, if there was such a thing.
Dressed to the nines.
Yes, dressed to the nines.
So can you tell us what you remember about the whispers of this disease that later turned out to be AIDS and the epidemic that followed?
I remember the exact moment. I can tell you almost the day what the weather was. I was invited to an apartment at 1 Fifth Avenue. Larry Kramer invited all the mover and shakers in the gay community because of this thing that was happening. And he had a doctor named Freeman Kine there. I remember we were all smokers at that time. Everybody smoked. All the furniture was moved away, and there must have been 100 of us in the room. And Freeman had all these pictures of his new patients who were developing the Kaposi's, and he showed pictures of it to the group of us and warned us that this was happening. And everybody just freaked, absolutely freaked. And I remember because I had just given up smoking, and I couldn't. The smoke was so bad, I had to leave. And I walked out with a guy who was also in the fashion world, and he said, "Oh, it's no problem for us. It's strictly a Fire Island thing. Don't worry about it." I do remember that day so vividly. I'm, like many other people, led many of my friends through to the final solution for them. I was very much involved, and Gene was very much involved. Changed everybody's life. Certainly changed my life. Gene he was into politics from the very beginning, into gay politics. Very radical, very much could have been an act up kind of guy if I let him. I sort of plugged myself into gay politics at that point. I became very much involved. I became the president of the gay organization out here on the East End of Long Island. I was one of the founders of it and president of it. And we had extraordinary, very talented, very well-known people out here. I became very much involved with the lesbian movement out here. To this day, many of them are my close friends. I was responsible for 5 or 6 of the biggest fundraisers out here for AIDS called ACT UP. I was the chair of it. We gave the first fundraiser for AIDS, the East Hampton High School. We raised $200,000, which was a lot of money for us at that point. So the AIDS world brought politics into our life, and we never looked back after that.
And obviously you would have had a lot of close friends that passed during that time.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We led at least 3. I led through the final stages. In the beginning of a friend of mine who got cancer, I'm sure it was AIDS, but we had no idea what it was at that point. But he was the first, Lee Kressel. But again, with all the horror, the camaraderie that formed between all the people out here, the men and the women, was really glorious. I mean, it gave us a stance, something to fight.
We eventually arose above it. It's not gone completely, but we've got some great drugs out there that help prevent now. So I suppose looking back on it too, for you, what you've seen in your time, it's wild imagination that we'd ever get to this point.
Yeah, I know. Have you ever seen anybody who, in the beginning, were you old enough to remember any of these people who died to have 80 pounds and 70 pounds? And
No, only what I've seen on documentaries and that, and it
oh
seemed
my
pretty
God. Oh
horrifying.
my God. One of the first ones to go was a friend of mine who lived out here. His name was Robert Jacobson, who was the head of the opera news, very famous opera man. And oh my God, we let him through into the final crises. Well, after he left a lot of money, and I became the head of the Richard Tucker Foundation. He left money for opera singers, and so I worked on that for years with the money. I'll never forget this big hulking man ended up like 60 pounds, 70 pounds.
Wow.
It was horrifying, horrifying.
Well, thank you on behalf of the community for everything you've done. And we've all got a token of appreciation and thanks for that, because without you guys doing it back then, we wouldn't have been where we are today. So thank you for that.
Well, I'll take that. Okay, I'll take that.
Now, you've got a new book out called Uncross Your Legs, A Lifetime in Fashion. Pretty exciting stuff. It's a pretty great read. So if you can get yourself a copy, go out there and get it. Recommended read for a nice weekend at home. Tell me about how it all came to be. What was your inspiration behind it?
Well, it goes back to Gene. He was a writer and I was a sketcher, and he kept a diary all the time. When we were on vacations, every night he would write in his diary and I would do sketches. And he said to me, well, someday you're going to write a book. I like what you say underneath your sketches. And right after he died, 30 some odd years ago, it's a long time that he's dead, I sat down and started to write a book called Notes and Sketches, which was a part of our life together. And at that moment in time, I was president of the CFDA. And when I gave it to an editor to get it placed, they kept saying we need more dirt, that kind of thing. And so I put it away. Obviously, it wasn't right. And when the pandemic hit, many, many years later, and I came out here to the house, I stayed here for a year without going back into the city. I sat in my big leather chair and I started to write longhand. And the title, of course, comes from what photographers scream at the first people in the front row of the fashion show who had their legs crossed, waiting for the show to begin. The photographers needed a clear picture. So one photographer named Richard Renner used to scream at them, uncross your legs, to the people in the front row. And that always resonated with me. And since I was president of all the fashion shows for 10 years, I must have seen 1,000 shows. I said, someday I'm going to use that title. And that title and the fact that I fell in love with this writer named Jan Morris, who's a great writer from Wales, and had written her last book in the age of 92, 93. I think if she could do it, maybe I can. And so I wrote the book. I let a very close friend of mine, who's a designer named Jeffrey Banks, see it. And he said, well, you have to put pictures in and you have to have sketches in. So it became a labor of love. And it's been out now a few months and it's doing very well. We're going into a second printing, believe it or not. Isn't that nice?
Wow, there you go. And, you became an author at the ripe old age of what, were you 93?
93, yeah, 93, 94. And boy, would Gene be proud of me. Oh, my God. Oh, he'd be so proud of me. I love it. And there may be another book. I may go back to the Notes and Sketches. I have these gorgeous sketches. You've seen the book, haven't you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I've seen the book. And the amazing thing is you created that whole book by freehand drawing.
Yeah, they're very quick sketches, but I have hundreds and hundreds of them. So there may be little sketches and notes about my life. We'll see how I feel. I'm still very, very busy. We just signed with FedEx. I've been doing FedEx uniforms for 45 years. They've just signed me to redo the next iteration. I have all the Sandal hotels in the Caribbean that I'm doing, 25 of them. I still do JetBlue's airline. I'm on QVC. This is my 31st year. I've been on it for 31 years. I go on. I just put a little more concealer over my dark spots. I drive everywhere. I play tennis 3 times a week, but I'm getting older. I'm getting older.
You wouldn't know it. I think, you could be the first man to live to 150.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think I want to. I don't think I want to. I've outlived all my doctors and dentists and they're all gone. So I've refreshed my coffers with all these young'uns. I'll have a young doctor and I've got a young dentist and I keep telling them I'm going to jump all over them. They're so fucking cute.
So what is the secret of living a long life?
I think the secret is I never motivated toward lousy people. I think I've only had one difficult person in my life as a designer. Nice people seem to motivate toward me. I don't like confrontation that is brutal. I think all those things have given me that longevity. I like people, but I like my privacy. So the dance continues. It's like the tango. It never finishes. I never lie down and think this is over. I'm always in some state of flux. And the other thing that's happened to me in the last years of my life is my love for music, of classical music. I'm an opera lover. I just hear the human voice in its operatic state. Just to be able to stay here and listen to a Mahler symphony is such a joy to me, such a joy. I am getting older. There's no doubt about that. And people are beginning to treat me like an older person. Oh, be careful. Can we help you with your coat?
I get that at 45, Stan, so you're not alone there. And I'm always falling over.
The first time that really happened to me was I was on the subway going up to the opera, and this woman said to me, "Would you like my seat, sir?" And I said, "No, I don't need your seat."
But, if that was me, I'd probably go, "Oh, yes, thank you very much," and sit down. Because you cannot get seats on them trains.
The other thing that I tell people these days, I had that moment with my father where he was very upset with my homosexuality, and his whole story to me was, well, what's going to happen to you in your old age? You're not going to have any children. You're not going to have any family. You're not going to, what is that about? Well, I mean, there is a chapter in my book called A Family of Friends, and I wish he was around to see all the friends I do have, which are my family. They are my family. There's no doubt about it. He would be shocked. It's a wonderful family that I have.
And you've built this fabulous life over the last 95 years. So if anything, it turned out to be a beautiful existence, and it's not over yet.
It's not. When I hang up the phone with you, I will get in my little car or my big car. I have a big car. And I'll go to the beach. I'll listen to music and let the sun hit my face, and then pick up my friend who's coming out for the weekend, come back, and we'll cook a pasta dinner. I'll make a fire in the fireplace, and all's good.
Stan, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on LGBTI Conversations today. The pleasure's been all mine.
Thank you for having me. It's sort of sweet talking about yourself. I like it.
If you love listening to LGBTI Conversations, make sure to follow. This will help other people find us much easier. And also, make sure that you never miss out on an episode. Thanks for listening to LGBTI Conversations with me, Anthony Doik.